I feel like the championship doesn't matter in WWE, and I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing. I'm gonna explain here because I want to go in depth and talk about CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, what we saw happen at Clash of the Castle, which, by the way, I thought overall the show was pretty solid. I had no real qualms with it. I thought that they nailed every single story beat, and there's some really big standouts and highlights. But what I'm talking about when it comes to championships and how WWE is doing their storyline specifically today, a lot of the stuff is very slow burn, long tail, long-term storytelling. And I gotta be honest, when I was watching Clash of the Castle and before it was even going on, I immediately was thinking, okay, Drew has to win. He's in Scotland. He's gonna be the hometown guy. Damian Priest's title run hasn't really been all that impressive, and it hasn't had much of a story link to it. I felt like, okay, Drew is just going to claymore this guy and it's gonna be over. I was enjoying that match a lot. I thought it really did deliver. I thought the spot with Priest getting tangled up in the ropes was, well, I thought that sucked for him, but it turned into a really excellent storytelling device in the match itself. But when we had the very ending and we had the ref bump and he was taken out, and then we saw CM Punk slide in. Well, actually, we didn't see CM Punk. We had the camera set up perfectly so that you couldn't see who the referee was. It was still focused in on Drew so that we could get his reaction of what was going on. And then it was revealed, and you could see like he was wearing Jordans or whatever, and the black hair slicked back and like the weird, like the long sleeve thing that he was wearing. So you could tell it was going to be Punk, and then it went 1, 2, and then he held up the deuces, which I believe in Scotland, apparently that's like the way he held it up is apparently the equivalent of a middle finger. Drew then is just in shock. We see later on after it all went down that like he was enraged by all of this, but Punk turns, hits Drew with a low blow, and Priest ends up getting the win, retaining his world title. And when the match ended, if you watched everything after that, even on social media, they did a great job of making sure to highlight Drew McIntyre's reaction. To me, Drew's reaction was a lot like Seth when at Survivor Series when Punk returned. And Seth, they showed Seth's reaction online. It was captured by fans, all that. He was freaking out and flipping him off and cursing at him for coming back. You got that feeling with Drew McIntyre losing at home. And he was grabbing the referee and he was shouting and swearing and everything. And Michael Cole was putting over Monday Night Raw saying like, you got to tune in. Like everyone now is looking at what is going to happen on Raw with Drew, with Punk. And that seems to be the big story. And it's not about the title. And it got me thinking about how we don't need the title. I was wrong. I felt like, well, this definitely is going to lead to Drew winning. And then you're going to get Drew versus Punk for the belt at SummerSlam, and that's what they're gonna do, which if you think it through, we're like, okay, well, Gunther, he's got the King of the Ring, he's got the title shot, he gets to have a title shot at SummerSlam. How is that all going to work and fit in together? So kind of clunky, but if we kind of rewind the tape, I guess it doesn't make sense that Damian Priest would have retained, because what would you do with Gunther then at SummerSlam? But I go back to this thinking of, yeah, it doesn't need the belt. It really doesn't. And this shows me that this is one of the storylines in WWE that just doesn't require it, and you could see the long-term play here. CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre is one of the most exciting storylines that I see in WWE right now. I am way more invested in it than anything Cody is doing, and Cody is the big top guy, and he's got bloodline stuff that's about to happen, and maybe my opinion will shift, and it'll come swinging back to Cody. But it's less to do with the belt, isn't it? It's more about that personal rivalry. And you have CM Punk, who has been injured. You have Drew McIntyre, who's also been injured, and he's been back now. But both guys, and Punk specifically, being off for so long that it hasn't even needed the belt. It's been about Drew trolling Punk, and now Punk flipping it on him and getting in his face and low blowing him in his home country, getting booed. Like, I thought if Punk was going to interfere, I worried that it was going to be too risky because it would turn Punk heel, and it kind of is what it is, isn't it? Now we get to see what's going to happen on Raw, so depending on when you're watching this, it may have already happened, and see what was going to go down. But it feels like Drew really needs to be able to go after CM Punk, that he needs to take him down and do everything he can to destroy him. And it's like another time that Punk has cost Drew the title. It's the second time Drew has lost a championship opportunity in his home country. The second time where felt like Drew should have won and he didn't. And all of that is culminating now to what is probably going to be the match at SummerSlam of Punk versus Drew McIntyre. And it's not for the belt, and I feel like it has even more legs than if it did have the title attached to it. And it does allow Damian Priest to do other things with the belt to try and get himself elevated even more. And I think this match did a lot for Damian Priest as well, because him as a champion hasn't felt like the belt mattered. It hasn't felt like it's really been the cornerstone for him. It's felt very secondary, and they played into it, which is a great thing. They talked about how Damian Priest is a paper champion in the eyes of Drew McIntyre, that he's transitional, all the stuff that online has said and that you hear chatter about. This match showed me that Damian Priest can do so much more. And if he was legitimately injured in that spot where his leg got tied up and that was all like injury, kudos to him. And if he was selling, like, the spot does not look like it was a planned spot, but coming out of it, if he was fine, but he just played into the leg injury and then they were using that as the storytelling device, kudos to him as well, because they were able to forward that story. And now it's like, it gives more credibility to Damian Priest. And Priest is going to go off and do his Judgment Day story. He's got Carlito, Rhea, you got Liv Morgan, Dom, like, there's a lot going on. And how are they going to plan for Damian Priest to go into Money in the Bank? How are they going to get him to SummerSlam, presumably against Gunther? But I love the fact that WWE right now, it doesn't totally need the title belts in order to motivate the stories. Cody's whole story arc has been about getting the belt, right? And then he accomplished that goal, but it took a couple of years. Drew and Punk is so much fun to watch, and it doesn't need the belt. And I think that's great because it also frees up opportunities for other wrestlers to focus in on the belt. And you know what? By the time we get to like WrestleMania, it could be Drew versus Punk for the belt, or Drew, Punk, Seth for the title. You never know. Drew could pick the belt up at Survivor Series. Drew could win Money in the Bank for all we know, and just take that title from Priest or Gunther at SummerSlam. Who knows what they're going to do with that? But my point is, I really love how they are not having to rely on the belt. They've done this in the past where it's been the main story, but when they focus just on someone trying to chase the belt, it can work, and the babyface chasing the heel is, you know, wrestling 101. But for me as a fan, it's always felt like it needed a little bit more, that it wasn't just about the title belt. What else is motivating them? And they've created a really compelling personal story between Drew and Punk at this point that is bubbling, very much like what you see with Otis, Alpha Academy, Chad Gable, Sami Zayn all involved. That all feels personal, and it's kind of bubbled and boiled to a point now where you're seeing it doesn't really need to be about the Intercontinental title. The Intercontinental title was kind of the side story in there. It wasn't totally about that now. It's about the deception and the relationship between Otis and Chad Gable and Sami Zayn involving Maxine and Kira Tozawa. It's all about the relationships and the moment when Otis will finally punch and hit Chad Gable and break them off officially. We saw at Clash of the Castle just the moment of Otis getting in the face of Chad Gable and the pop it got just for them staring off with each other, the crowd wanting that. It's not about the belt, and that's why I think WWE is doing a really good job lately. Not everything is perfect by any means. There's some stuff where I'm just like, okay, and sometimes they do need to have the title belts be the focus. Look at the tag division right now on both brands, on Raw and SmackDown. What's going on? They're finally doing a little bit with DIY and SmackDown titles and world titles. They haven't had any stories. Miz and R-Truth, it's comedy. They're not building up the tag divisions. The women's tag division has at least had a little bit more legs and focus lately, and that has been about just getting the tag titles. So yes, they do use the tag titles as storytelling devices 100%, but when it comes to something like Drew and Punk, it's been great to see that it is not the key focus. And as a fan of like AEW, I wish we were seeing a little bit more of this in AEW. I like that AEW does a lot of things different, but it hasn't been clicking for me a lot lately because I don't feel the stories are very motivated or very well thought out. Where I want to see more personal stories and not just contender for belt, fights champion, have a match, then match is over, then move on, let's do another tournament, let's have another champion crown. And then it's all about the belts, and then we have an influx of title belts as well. And that's where it doesn't always click for me. Sometimes they do give you really cool personal stories, I love what Christian did with the TNT title for so long. That was like some of the most entertaining stuff. And it was less to do about the TNT title in some regard. It was more I was just more focused in enjoying Christian's work than anything else and the stories he could tell. The match itself of Drew and Damian Priest, I thought it did deliver. Like, I would give it whatever, 4 out of 5 stars basically, because I thought they did a really good job of making a hard-hitting match, and the finish, didn't really see that coming. Could have argued that Punk was getting involved somehow, some way, and he was in town and everyone saw him doing social media appearances and stuff like that and interviews, so they knew that he was in Scotland. Figured he'd get involved somehow, sure, but didn't know how, and that's the fun of it. And also, if you guys did catch online too, WWE did actually a good job with this. They posted a backstage segment where it was Punk backstage watching the match, seeing the moment when there was the ref bump, and then Punk asking the referee, "Give me a shirt," and the confusion, and then he tossed on the referee shirt and ran out there and did the spot. That is the storytelling detail that I love, because it made sense. It didn't make sense if you just watched it on TV. Why would Punk be ready to go with a referee shirt and slide down when he would be able to predict that a referee was going to get taken out so then he could interfere? You know what I mean? There's no logic there. In the moment, you're popping and you're loving it because you're like, hey, Punk did it. Oh, it's a cool moment. But when you unravel it, you would sit there and go, it doesn't make any sense that CM Punk would slide down as the referee. How would he know the referee was going to get hurt? How would he know that this was going to be at this spot and to think, oh, I'll get a ref shirt on and plan and wait for this to happen if it happens? But they did an excellent job because they told the reason why Punk got the referee shirt. And I love that their story between Punk and Drew, it hasn't been about the belt at all. Drew's story is about the belt in some degree, in some regard, because he keeps getting screwed out of it. He keeps trying to climb the mountain and become champion, and CM Punk has been the foil for him. And so you can almost empathize with Drew on one hand, even though people see him as more as the heel and the bad guy, but you never know what we're gonna get by the time we get to SummerSlam. I mean, CM Punk low blows the guy. If you just look at it on paper, CM Punk's the bad guy here. He is the heel. He screwed Drew in his hometown. He low blowed him. He didn't count to 3. Punk did all of the heel things. But it's beyond just heel and face. It's just two guys that just don't like each other. And Punk is now like, I'm gonna screw you over in every opportunity. He doesn't like Drew McIntyre. And so with a feud like this, you could have this thing go on for months. And I love that. And you can at a later point bring in the belt if you want to, but you don't need to. They've done such a good job of elevating this story with guys that are injured, that haven't even wrestled each other yet for what feels like half a year. And it's going to culminate at SummerSlam. That's a bigger match than any belt right now. It's a bigger match than whatever Cody is doing. It's bigger than the world title. And that's where I feel like the championship doesn't really matter.